What did you thought was normal growing up? When I was a kid, I'd walk to school. When it was cold, I'd come home, and my mom would ask, "Why are you wheezing?" I'd shrug because I thought it was just what happened to people when it was cold. Found out several years later that I had exercise-induced asthma, and cold weather was my main trigger. Ever since I can remember, I got periodic weird, sparkly things in my field of vision. Rainbow, jagged, circular-ish thing that gradually got bigger until my head seemed to pass through the ring, and then it faded. Happened all the time. I would get really cranky, achy, and tired afterward. Always happened when my mom would take me shopping for clothes or groceries. She used to get so annoyed when I wanted to leave after 10 minutes at the mall. In my 20s, I mentioned it in passing. "Oh, hang on, I have a sparkly thing. Ugh, I hate these, because now I'm going to have a headache." Mom was like, "Wait, what?" "Yeah, I have chronic migraine with aura, and fluorescent light is a primary trigger." Ever since I was little, I would frequently feel my heart kind of flop around and skip beats. I always thought this was normal until a doctor noticed it during a routine physical exam. He asked if I was nervous about being at the doctor, and I told him my heart always does that. Turns out I just have a lot of premature ventricular contractions. My cardiologist told me they're very common, but most people don't actually feel them all the time. When I'm in a room with other people, part of my brain is paying attention to every conversation my ears can pick up all at once. Specifically, it's paying attention to the emotional temper of each conversation, in case someone suddenly starts having a bad time. Turns out most of you just listen to one conversation at a time. My way is actually a consequence of growing up around an explosive parent. Deep down, I don't want anything to happen that will lead to an angry person yelling at us. This also explains why I have a hard time in groups bigger than 10 or so. There tends to be too many voices having different conversations, and I get overwhelmed processing it all. If I can't keep up, I feel vulnerable and exposed, and things cycle downward from there. PMDD. Every month, I would stay quiet about my symptoms because I genuinely thought everyone else experiencing menstruation also got extremely angry, exhausted, hopeless, and couldn't stop thinking about wanting to kill themselves and everyone around them. I missed an insane amount of school and got fired from jobs because I could not function for about 2 weeks out of every month. I only realized I had an issue after seeing someone describe PMDD online. I now use birth control continuously, so no periods or hormonal change for me. I had a very complete sex education, but they never talked about specifically what symptoms mentally during menstruation are normal and what are not. My parents worked full-time and left me home alone a lot. They never checked if I had homework or anything like that. So I just come home from school, watch TV, play with my dog, whatever by myself. I literally never did my homework because no one was there to make me. More often than not, I was a bit bored and lonely. Most days I would try and find a friend to come hang out. I'd ring, this was in the 90s, every single kid in my class to come over and play. They always said no, they weren't allowed because they had homework to do and because my parents weren't home. I didn't understand the concept of not allowed. My parents weren't even there. I could just go anywhere I wanted. Why couldn't they? It wasn't until I was an adult with my own kids that I realized their parents were just a lot more responsible than mine. My answer: I always thought it was normal for people to have dinner as late as 9 or 10 p.m. Growing up, my family would eat really late because my parents worked long hours, and it just became part of our routine. It wasn't until I started having dinner with friends or staying over at their houses that I realized most families eat around 6 or 7 p.m. I remember being so confused, like, wait, you guys eat this early. Now that I think about it, we probably got a lot of weird looks from neighbors for having dinner so late all the time. I thought that everyone stopped eating dinner together as a family as soon as you learned how to eat without making a giant mess and no longer needed to be supervised while you ate your food. For basically my whole life other than the first few years, everyone in my family has ate dinner in separate areas at different times, and I thought that the only families that ate dinner together were religious families. I quickly discovered how wrong I was and how unconventional my family is. My parents are both functioning alcoholics in denial and did the bare minimum to ensure I had food and made it to school, but that was about it. Once I finished elementary school and started going to middle school, they were never involved in anything in my life. And I moved out at the age of 14, which they had no issues with as long as I was still going to school, which I was. CDH, cluster headaches, combined with tinnitus. I used to think it was normal since people around me also complained about heaving a headache from time to time, so I guess I thought it was just normal and went along with it. As I got older, I just once overheard a conversation about cluster headache and started looking into it. Apparently, it's not something everyone has, and there's even people killing themselves over it. I think they got a more severe version than me, though. Also, because I didn't know, I just learned to live with it without caring. Honestly, anxiety in general. I didn't realize it wasn't normal to have extreme anxiety about things that were absolutely minuscule until my mid-teens years. I was joking to a friend that I hoped I would throw up before a party we were going to instead of during, and she said, "Why would you throw up before or during?" I replied something like, when you get that dizzy, nervous feeling when you know you're supposed to be somewhere around a group of people, so you have to throw up to feel better. Needless to say, she did not know what I was talking about and asked have I ever talked to a doctor about it, and I honestly just assumed everyone felt like that when they went to parties, new places, appointments, or just anywhere really. Ever since I was a child, I would constantly worry and get anxiety. Sometimes it was even over things that weren't a big deal, like answering the phone or going to a place I'd already been dozens of times. I was constantly thinking someone was mad at me, even if absolutely nothing happened for the thought to even enter my mind. The worst was when I was laying in bed at night, and I would just feel this sense of impending doom, as if something terrible was going to happen out of nowhere. I'm not going to lie, even as an adult, it still blows my mind that there are people who don't experience anxiety on a day-to-day basis. To those people I say, what's it like to be God's favorite? LOL. Edited for a few spelling mistakes. When I think to myself, I often use we. If I'm getting up to get some coffee, I'll think, let's go get some coffee. It's not a split personality thing. I think I distinguish between the parts of me that does / feels / thinks things and the meta part of me that observes myself. I saw a Reddit post about this a few years ago, and I realized that a few people do the same thing, but most people think it's very weird. I thought it was normal to have headaches nearly daily till I brought it up to my former psychiatrist when I was 18. He asked me if I was in any pain because I kept grimacing because my head was hurting so much. He referred me to neurology. It took years, but I finally have the headaches mostly under control thanks to medication, PT, and trigger point injections. We also recently found an abortive med that actually works without major side effects. Dreaming while awake and orchestrating my sleeping dreams. Turns out I had severe sleep apnea for all my life with 86 apnea, stopped breathing, events per hour, or about every minute and a half. I was treated with CPAP, and my whole world changed for the better after the first 8 hours of real sleep. Honestly, when I was little, I thought most people were hyper, insane, evangelical Christians like I was raised. I got out of that world in high school. As a kid, I knew some people weren't Christian, but I truly thought it was the norm. Now I see that my upbringing was really extreme and bordered on cult. I am well into my 50s. In the last 3 years, I have discovered that most people can visualize and have the other senses in their head. I have none. Aphantasia is not visualizing. I realize most people have a narrator or internal monologue. I have none. My brain is so quiet compared to friends and family, I don't know how they put up with all that going on. I didn't know people can't smell ants, bugs, and other scents. First time I walked into a friend's apartment, I said, "Whoa, dude, you got an ant problem." He was like, "Oh shit, where's the ants?" I'm like, "Ick man, but I smell them." He looked at me like I was the dumbest fucker he's ever seen and just told me that's impossible. Sure enough, in his pantry, a little line of those fuckers pillaging a bag of rice into a vent via conga line. On that day, I learned not everyone can smell ants. I grew up in a house overlooking the St. John River. It never occurred to me that it was unusual that the river would sometimes be flowing in one direction and sometimes in the other direction. I thought all rivers did that, and it was normal. The tides in the Bay of Fundy are so high, they cause the lower end of the river to reverse direction for a while at high tide. I used to hear a full symphony in my head when I lay down at night. Most of the time it's mellow with beautiful violins, oboes, French horns. It slowly builds and can be quite moving. It's never songs I've heard or know. I have zero musical talent, so in my head it all stays. I say used to because once I developed tinnitus, the ringing has taken place of the music. Pretty crappy trade-off. I live in the US and was pretty astonished when I went to college out of state and met a whole lot of people who'd never heard of Tonga. The first person I thought was wildly ignorant. To me, it was like being unaware that China exists. Like, yeah, we don't live anywhere near Tonga, but surely you've met a billion Tongans. How have you never heard of Tonga? But shortly after that, I told a friend of mine that I'd met an astonishingly ignorant person who'd never heard of Tonga. And turns out my friend had never heard of it either. And neither had anyone else we were friends with at college. When I then Googled Tonga and showed my friends that it exists, in the same article we pulled up to read all about Tonga, it happened to mention that my hometown has the largest population of Tongan people outside of Tonga. Hence why I thought everybody on Earth had met Tongans. Mirroring other people's behavior and making a personality fitting for them results in me being super stressed when I meet new people because I don't know how to behave. Social contact also costs a lot of energy. Turns out people don't think of that and just kind of go as themselves. However, that's supposed to work. Also genuinely enjoying being alone. I told a friend that I will just lock myself in my flat for a few days to relax, and he said that's a bit extreme. For me, it's really nice and relaxing. I need my alone time and don't miss social contact as fast as other people. I didn't realize that people didn't memorize movies to keep from being bored. When I was a kid, we lived pretty far from my grandparents, so that was a long trip in the car. So I learned that I could break up the time by re-watching a movie as we drove. So I was praised for being able to sit still, but I was reciting Aladdin or Land before time in my head the whole time. I still do this to some extent. The last time I was able to drive down to Florida, I looked at the trip time and thought, oh, that's not too bad. That's 2 Hamiltons and a Lion King. I didn't realize that other people didn't memorize scripts down to the actors' inflections until I took an acting course, and monologues and cold reads came really easy to me. It turns out most people remember certain lines that they like or remember a funny scene is coming up. I felt like the biggest dork when I explained it. I didn't realize I was probably mildly allergic to shellfish until I was about 21. I was having a sushi bowl in college and was telling my girlfriend that I love shrimp and crab, but I always get a nauseous headache whenever I eat it. She had to tell me that wasn't normal, and I probably had an allergy. Realized that probably made sense BC several of my fam members had shellfish allergies. Since childhood, I have been eating shrimp and crab and feeling funky afterwards. I literally just thought eating crab gave everyone headaches. Sounds causing actual physical sensations. I don't just mean the sound waves that everyone hears. I'm talking about actual shapes with textures and movements in and around my torso. It turns out I have tactile audio synesthesia. Almost everyone who has any type of synesthesia is surprised when they finally figure out that other people don't experience the world the way that they do. I am intolerant to lactose, and in elementary school, would look around wondering how everyone else seems so comfortable when they must be holding in the same amount of air. Especially odd that I was the only one rattling the halls mid-class to try to find relief without being exposed. Really confused me for years. Someone asked how I learned to braid my own hair. I explained that I picture in my head what it looks like as if I'm braiding someone else's hair while braiding my own, like if I was watching myself. They looked at me like I was crazy and said they cannot do that. I didn't know it wasn't a common thing. When I was really little, my family went to church every week. But try as I might, I couldn't believe the things they taught. So my 5-year-old brain decided if I didn't believe it, there was no way all the people around me believed it. That would be silly. Surely, everyone was just faking belief, because that's what you did. Just another way we all pretended to be a person. On a missions trip when I was 12, I looked around and realized the people around me actually believed it. I was floored. Also, turns out I'm autistic. Having a father who was always home and a mother who went to work. My father made music at parties and events for a living, so he mostly worked the weekends. My father was the one picking us up from school, volunteering at school, doing groceries, cooking, cleaning. Nowadays, it's more common to have all these tasks divided between 2 partners/parents. But back then it wasn't. I never noticed until I was 21 and moved in with my then boyfriend. He refused to do anything in the house because that was a woman's job. His mother actively taught him that. That was the first time I actively started thinking about my situation growing up and how me and my siblings seemed to be blind to traditional gender roles. And yes, I did stay with that guy for way too long, but I finally saw the light and am currently very happy with a man who had a similar upbringing with a father working night shifts. Our tasks in the house are equally divided. Posting this not for me, but on behalf of the very sad man who said this the other day. Yeah, his Discord is full of racism, but it's gamers. There isn't a single Discord out there where people don't say the N-word. I immediately thought of the 50 Discords I have joined in my life. All of them probably banning with no warning anyone who said that shit, God. You know how you mainly look through one eye? What? No. You don't mainly look out one eye? No. I look through both my eyes equally. Oh, I thought everyone had a preferred eye, like being right or left-handed. No. So it turns out my left eye is really bad, and I'm not just right-eyed. Asking why. The amount of people that get mad/flustered and can't answer why. For even the simplest things. Like that I'm not jumping just because you said so. Why? The more people I meet, the more I notice it's not common to question others. A lot of things are just accepted as fact, and people move accordingly. Being afraid of your dad. Like my dad wasn't a monster who did awful stuff to us, but he was just kind of mean and strict and shouty and cold. My best friend when I was a kid had a similar relationship with her dad, and my first girlfriend too. I was in my early 30s when I had the epiphany that scary wasn't a defining feature of father for lots of people. He died when I was 20. I never knew that people actually see things in their head when they visualize something. Like I think of an apple, I know what it looks like, but I don't actually see anything, and it blew my mind that people actually do see things in their head. It never occurred to me. I just thought that we knew what things looked like when we imagined things, but as it turns out, I have aphantasia. Grew up with extremely absent parents. Father was at work 90% of the time. Mother was always busy with something else, meaning anything you can think of that's under the sun. Hobbies, friends, her siblings, or her parents. Everything except her kids. I grew up under the impression that this was just how things were. During my teen years and started to hang out more and more in my friends' homes, I was totally shocked how much of a normal person their parents were. They were just like grown-up kids. They hung out with their kids, casual talk, etc. Growing up, I thought most people believed in young Earth creationism and evolution was false. I thought there was a fringe group of weird scientists that thought monkeys turn into people and a handful of people that believed them. Not only was I very wrong in my sheltered upbringing, but I was part of a very fringe group. Not only do most people accept evolution as fact, but most Christians do as well. Maladaptive daydreaming. If I hear any song, I can imagine myself in a music video and imagine people watching it on my channel/website. Woman facepalming lights can own I've had this thought process since I was about 10, 11. I used to walk miles a day, maladaptive daydreaming to music to the where I'd walk 4 to 6 a day. Not just around my neighborhood in circles, but a path pacing back and forth in my own yard. Now I just do it while I'm in the car, taking a quick walk or doing housework. I also daydreamed so much as a kid. I'm horrible at math because of this. I had a teacher once write, "Warning, daydreamer," to my future teacher. I accidentally seen the note on her desk. I always knew that there were some people who grew up in abusive households or had bad relationships with their parents, but I didn't realize how common that was until I got older. I thought dysfunctional families were like a rare exception, or that the extent of dysfunction was very small and like within the realm of just typical family quirks, like it is in my own family. I had the same experience. I also thought I was just slower than everyone else and not as good at sports as a kid, as I would wheeze and fall behind in literally every sport that required running. It wasn't until I was almost 30 and finally got an inhaler that I looked back on my childhood and realized that was it all along. I also have exercise-induced asthma, and literally no one in my life believed it was a real thing. They thought I was faking for attention, like, yeah, I'm red in the face, wheezing, gasping for air for attention. It was really bad as a child. Even getting scared could cause an attack because of the adrenaline rush. I didn't get a diagnosis until I was 13, then with an inhaler, life got so much easier. As I've gotten older, it's gotten so much better. Like I almost outgrew it. Somehow, I haven't had to use it. Inhaler in 3 years. The last time I had to use it was when I was in labor with my son, which I mean is a lot of exercise, which is understandable, lol. No one believes me either, mainly because I'm also fat. There's actually a big difference between puffing from being out of shape and having your airways actually close up, believe it or not. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.